Back at it again. It's the Football Playbook with your boy RSC and the place to be. Ric Serritella telling it like it is when it comes to your Philadelphia Eagles hosting the Green Bay Packers this Sunday night affair over at the Ocean Casino Resorts in Atlantic City. Make sure you get down there at the gallery. And before we get to the Sunday night game, there's going to be a lot of Thanksgiving, Thursday night football, and Friday college football, Saturday, then Sunday. Oh, my God. It's a can't stop, won't stop affair in the football universe here at the Football Playbook Show. And here with your Philadelphia Eagles, our next guest is a Wednesday regular. He joins us from the Eagles Newswire over at USA Today. Glenn Erby, good morning to you. How are you today?
Pleasure, Rick. How you doing this morning? Good to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, man, we're holding up okay. God forbid I talk a little bit about society and send our thoughts and prayers and loves down to Virginia. They need it. But otherwise, man, I'm looking forward to the football docket ahead, man.
Definitely.
So much good. It's been a while since we had some good Thanksgiving games, right?
Yeah, all three games are pretty good. Pretty good, all three.
All three, I kind of like, it could go either way, right? So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully you have some good Thanksgiving plans. Maybe we can get into that. But I do want to pick your brain about the reaction from the Colts game. We'll preview the Packers showdown. But first, before I went to the commercial break, I was talking about Miles Sanders.
Okay.
And he's in a contract year. We've talked about that. And, he had that career high, 27 carries, $157. And then they put him in mothballs. And then this past week, he makes the big play with Zaire Franklin covering him. He draws the pass interference. He gets the Eagles down inside the red zone. And then I thought they're going to reward him. They give him the ball. He carries it for 6 yards. They give it to him again. He gets the first down. He's running tough. He's running hard-nosed. He's running exactly how we want Miles Sanders to play. And then they put him on ice and they run Boston Scott. I mean, I can't make sense of it, Glenn. I mean, what do you see? What do you think?
Well, I think before we talked about the committee approach, and when it comes to that, I don't think they really care. I mean, I think they like Miles Sanders, but I think they've shown that they don't believe he's an Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey type. So it's a situation where I don't think they'll necessarily let him walk, but they feel like they can win with any running back. So I think, at its core with the owner, the GM, they want to be a passing team first. So regardless of who the quarterback is, they're going to try to push the ball downfield, feature them at, as a passing offense. So the running back in the running game is irrelevant. I think that the concern is why they can't get either of the three backs involved in the passing game, especially Gainwell. So in terms of the carries, we weren't really worried about that because they like to pass the ball. The inability to get a guy like Gainwell, who came into the league as a dual threat involved in the passing game, that's the concern.
That is a concern too, but going back, I don't disagree. Like they maybe they feel they can win with any running back. Well, how come they go to the third string running back when the game's on the line? Why don't they go to Gainwell, who technically he is their backup, or is he just the pass catching guy at this point?
I think at this point it's just the pass catching guy. Now, why they don't feature Miles or treat him like other team, other organizations treat their star running back, I can't call it, but I truly feel like they feel like depending on who's in the game, depending on the scheme, as long as that offensive line is there, any running back can get the carries, any running back can score.
Or as long as Jalen Hurts is there to bail you out, I think that's really, and we saw that against the Colts. When all else fails, Jalen said, hey, buckle up. He put the team on his back. He got the job done. We thought he was going to win the game when they couldn't pull it out. He brought him back. He brings him back again. We saw it in Arizona. They brought him back. So don't tell me Jalen Hurts can't play from behind. This guy's pretty clutch. Now, he's had his moments where at the end of the game, I would have liked to see them speed it up and have more urgency down the stretch. But overall, big picture, we just saw it against the Colts. Like, he is a top-level quarterback because he can take over a game. He can put a team on his back. And I always say, like, Daniel Jones, I've watched almost every start of that guy's career. I never seen him single-handedly win a game. Jalen Hurts can.
Correct. I think you saw a lot of those run plays. They were designed for him. So I think at that point, they felt like he was their best option in the running game. He's seeing things in the passing games. I think you see situations where he's able to change plays at the line of scrimmage. He's able to dictate pace, and he did a good job of dictating pace and doing what he needed to do to win without Dallas Goedert in the lineup. So I think that's important as well. He has winning traits. We talked about before him being in the same offense the second year, so he's only going to continue to get better. I think he's just passed his 30th start as a pro, so the sky's the limit for him.
Think about that, his 30th start. And he's 24 years old.
Correct.
And I know I say that a lot, but again, like Hendon Hooker at Tennessee, who's now got an ACL injury, he's 25, right? And you got guys now coming out in this year's quarterback class that are older than Jalen Hurts. But Jalen Hurts got 30 starts under his belt, yet there's some media pundits that want the Eagles to move on from Jalen and go draft a quarterback, and I just don't understand that logic. Even if you've got the top guy, which would be CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, they're nowhere near the in-game experience and proven commodity with what you have with Hurts.
Correct. I think we talked before about the pundits and the experts wanting him to win a certain way or wanting him to play a certain way. But I think we see it from Josh Allen. We see it from Mahomes. We just want him to win. He's efficient. He's making good decisions. He's not turning the ball over. So at that point, he's not even becoming a negative force. He's always getting positive yards. So there's really nothing to complain about. Let him play his game, continue to scheme things around him, just put him in a situation to where he can get other guys involved. But in terms of the way he's playing, how he plays the game, he's fine. That's the way the game's going to evolve anyway.
Yeah, and I've heard a couple people talk about this now. I think Steichen mentioned it in his presser. Charles Davis was talking about it on the broadcast. Everyone talks about run-pass option. With Jalen, it's a RPR, run-pass-run, because that third option is, Jalen tucks and runs. So he's a lot of time making one or two reads on the linebacker or the safety. And then that third read, the way Steichen phrased it was a lot of times the third option might be better for Jalen to just tuck and run it than it is in reading his progression in the passing game. But I still say, hey, let's try to preserve some of these hits. I get it. He avoids big hits. I get it. He was hurt last year on a play that was in the pocket and not scrambling. But again, it's a numbers game. Look at Josh Allen. You mentioned him. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you. And when it does, like Kyler Murray, he's relegated to the pocket passing. They were 7-0, debacle down the stretch. Josh Allen with the UCL injury now, suddenly they fell from the top seed. They're like the 6th seed now. That could put their whole season in flux. And I guess, I'm beating a dead horse here, but again, Jalen Hurts took over 20 body blows last week.
Correct.
You can't keep playing sustainable football that way, can you?
No, I don't think you necessarily want him to perform or run like a running back, but I think he does a good job of sliding. He has good pocket presence. So I think in a situation where you saw Allen get hurt trying to make a throw, by then Hurts would have already left the pocket. So I think it's a situation where, like we said, he does a good job of sliding. It works that way. The protections work that way. So you just let him do what he does. He's getting better. He gets the ball out of bounds. Now, we would like him to probably throw the ball away a little bit more, and not take the hit. But in terms of the way he plays the game, that's the way he plays it, and he's going to continue to play it that way.
Talking to Glenn Erby, Eagles Newswire USA Today here on the Football Playbook, along with Ric Serritella. Let me get your thoughts on Ndamukong Suh Linval Joseph. Big splash. Filled a big void there, and it looked like it was the same old rodeo on that first drive. The Colts went down the field, and they really rammed it down their mouth there and punched them in the nose on that first drive, but they got it together. I think they were kicking off the rust, kind of feeling through the process. And I said, Howie Roseman up in the press box when Suh and Joseph converged to meet in the backfield with that joint sack, he had to be feeling pretty good about himself in terms of the moves that he made.
For sure, for sure. They were super impactful. And I think Jonathan Gannon did a good job of scheming and playing those two together. So I think on that first drive, you saw Joseph start the game, but he played most of that drive alone. But I think once you started playing those two together, they did an excellent job of shutting down the line of scrimmage. I think Brian Baldinger did a couple of breakdowns where you saw just how impactful and powerful Joseph is, holding two guys up and it's making the stop. So I think it was two wonderful signings. It allowed Fletcher Cox to be fresh. It allows Jonathan Gannon to pull Fletcher Cox if he needs to. So he has plenty of options, especially with Davis coming back after this next game.
Now, that leads me into my next question, Glenn, because he'll be eligible to come off the IR. Do we know if he will be ready to come off the IR? And then the second part of that question, in the odd man fronts, or even in the four-man fronts, will we see Jordan Davis and Linval Joseph on the field at the same time, do you think? Or will they split those nose tackle reps and kind of let them share that nose 50-50, you think?
I think a little bit of both. I think it works and it's conducive for the defense to have them both on obvious rundowns. I think there's a situation where you can still play them both and you can slide Suh to defensive end. I think on obvious passing downs, I think you put Jordan Davis in because he's the better pass rusher of the three at this point because of his youth. But I think he has options now. Like we said, I think it's a situation where if Fletcher Cox not performing, you can pull him out. You can slide Javon Hargrove up and down the line. You can slide Milton Williams up and down the line. So you have options in terms of how you want to play the front and who you want to play.
Yeah, and I think when Jordan Davis does return, if everybody remains healthy, a weakness will suddenly become a strength on the team. And, that's some good news for the Philadelphia Eagles. All right, let me ask you about penalties and turnovers. They seem to be creeping up on the Eagles here. The first half of the season, pretty clean with the turnovers. They were on the right side of the turnovers, and penalties really haven't been a big issue until the last 2 or 3 games, especially early on this week. The tight ends, talk about a fish out of water.
Correct.
Tyree Jackson had a costly one that wiped out an A.J. Brown screen. I know Calcaterra and even Stoll, I think, was flagged throughout the game. So we saw the impact of the loss of Dallas Goedert, which I'll ask you about next. But in terms of penalties and turnovers, Sirianni always preaches, hey, turnovers ain't luck. We coach that. Well, are you coaching the team how to prevent the turnovers then? Because they've been coughing it up here more frequently in recent weeks.
No, I think they'll be fine. I mean, it's a long season. I think the idea is to continue to be on the other side of the turnover margin. So you want to continue to be on the plus side. And as long as we continue to take the ball away more than we give it away, that works out. I think a situation where the A.J. Brown fumble, he should have just went down, or he was just being lazy with the ball. He redeemed himself. I think the Quez Watkins fumble from last week, he was still hustling, trying to make a good play. So I think as long as if those things happen and they're trying to make plays or they're hustling, you can't fault it. But I think the penalties are down, like you said. The overall turnovers are down. So I don't think that's necessarily something we should harp on. I think they'll improve it. It's a long season. There's still 7 games left. As long as they stay ahead and they're turning teams over more than they turn the ball over, they'll be fine.
All right, we're talking to Glenn Erby here on the Football Playbook. Ric Serritella here. All right, so you mentioned A.J. Brown, who I think is a yak machine, and he's just so effective in the screen game. We saw them kind of get away from that, and A.J. Brown didn't have exactly the greatest game again. Is that more performance? Is that the hamstring, do you think? What is exactly the situation going on with A.J. Brown?
I think that's just more game flow, and I think Hurts is going to follow the game flow. Even we talk about them being best friends, we talk about them being close, but he's not going to deviate from the process. So I think you're going to see a situation where they continue to target him, they continue to target Devontae Smith. I think they can do a better job of targeting the 2 running backs while Goddard is out. But I think in terms of the overall production and things of that nature, he's still on pace for a really good season. He's still on pace to break his career numbers. It's just about getting him the ball in space and getting him the ball where he can do damage, kind of like the Niners do Deebo Samuel.
without Goddard, 3 more of these games without Goddard. That's a big void, obviously. So how do they move forward with this offense that, it's kind of a catch-22 because I say they're the most dangerous offense because they can beat you in so many different ways.
Correct.
They also lack an identity, which I guess it could be construed as a good thing or a bad thing because from week to week, you don't know if they're going to come out and air it down the field, if they're going to come out and run the ball 40 times. Like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? And how do they move forward without Goddard?
I think, like we just talked about, I think it's a situation where you try to see them get the running backs involved in the passing game. But I think in terms of the total passing game, it's going to be all about A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, and Zach Pascal. And I think it's a situation where, in terms of the overall identity, they can always fall back on running the ball and RPO. So that is their identity. If things fell apart, they would just essentially do what they did last year and be a run-first team. So I think they want to have the identity of a pass-first team, deep passing game, efficient passing game. But when all else fails, you have a quarterback who can carry the ball, and you have an offensive line who can carry your team.
All right, let's get to we'll get into the Packers here in a second. Before we do, inquiring minds want to know. A lot of people are asking about injury updates in the chat room. You addressed the Jordan Davis situation. He'll be eligible to return, in 2 weeks, Glenn?
This week could be his last game. He's eligible to return against the Titans. We'll see. We haven't seen anything about him doing any on-field activities or anything like that. He's a big guy. It was a high ankle sprain, so I wouldn't be shocked if it was a 5-week thing. But this is his last games in terms of IR and games missed.
Okay, so then Avonte Maddox has to be eligible to come off the IR as well. What's his status?
2 more weeks for him. So you have Davis with 1, you have Maddox with 2, and he's that's the biggest hole we need filled and the guy we need back. And I think that's something we haven't talked about, but the slot is a huge problem.
Well, you just mentioned it, so let's talk about it. Josiah Scott, a little bit shaky. Do you want to see more Zach McPherson? Do you think they can skate by with Scott in that role for another week or 2? What do you think the Eagles should do moving forward there?
I think Scott puts them in a situation where you end up having C.J. Gardner-Johnson play more man-to-man than you want. I think all 4 guys played 68 snaps, the 2 corners and the 2 safeties. But when you have Maddox, it allows the 2 safeties to play over the top, play in space, and make plays. With Josiah Scott, you now have situations where he's not playing those same amount of snaps that Avonte Maddox is playing. And then when they do go to man, there's situations where the safety is now matched up on the guy in the slot because he's the better coverage guy. So I think from that standpoint, it's causing Jonathan Gannon to play more zone man principles than he'd like to play. So that's something to watch over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think I might have seen an occasional miscommunication there with Scott and the safeties on the back end and the zone coverage. So yeah, so I agree there. All right, let's get into this Packers matchup. A lot's been made about Aaron Rodgers, who I think he has more 300-yard passing games than any quarterback in the NFL. He's got damn near 50 of them.
Right.
Yet he hasn't had a 300-yard passing game in almost a calendar year in a league that it seems like almost every quarterback's thrown for 300 yards these days. We had good friend Bill Huber on yesterday, and I guess LaFleur and Rodgers have been going back and forth in the media all season long. What do you make of the state of the Packers? What do you make of Aaron Rodgers? And what do you make of the overall just competitiveness of this Green Bay Packers franchise, which is a storied organization? It's hard to remember the last time they've been this down and out.
I think you have a rebuilding franchise with a $50 million quarterback. So it really doesn't make sense in terms of how you want to do it. I think you have a situation where you have 2 young receivers, but I think they've been on the field for maybe a total of 1 quarter together. So you haven't had the chance to have Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Alan Lazard on the field at the same time. So I think you're missing pieces. You're not getting the play you necessarily want from the tight end, and they're not focusing on the run game either. So I think it's an organization in flux with the quarterback who's the highest paid guy in the NFL.
Yeah, and they're kind of banged up too. I know Rashawn Gary's out for the season.
Right.
Will they look to the Eagles? Will they look to ground and pound? Will they look to air it out? What is the secret sauce for beating the Packers, do you think?
I think a little bit of both. I think you have the physical matchups to run the ball. I think you see who they put Jair Alexander on, and the guy opposite of him, you go at Rasul Douglas. So I think you're familiar with how Rasul Douglas plays. You're familiar with the ability to beat him on a double move. So I'd expect Jair Alexander to come out on AJ Brown. That means you feed Devontae Smith, Quez Watkins, and those guys, and you see what they do on the back end.
Yeah, what's the saying? One man's trash is another man's treasure. Rasul Douglas has been playing some pretty reliable football there for the Packers.
For sure. He's earned himself a new deal. He made plays last year, but in terms of the two cornerbacks and which one you prefer to target, I feel like Steichen would prefer to target him over Jair Alexander, but we'll see.
Yeah, I liked Alexander coming out of Louisville. He's been a playmaker. I think he's a weapon with the ball in his hands when he makes an interception. So you got to be careful there. Now, for the Packers offense, despite what we saw last week, which was Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh plugging up that run pretty good, I would imagine that's going to be where they think the strength is in terms of attacking the Eagles' defense. They're going to have to lean on Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, as you alluded to. You got rookie wide receivers. They're not going to fare too well against Slay and Bradbury. So I'm imagining Green Bay is going to look to ground and pound.
For sure. I think even prior to last week, that would have been the obvious point of emphasis. Even with those two guys coming in, I think you still want to try to do that. You have two running backs, two different skill sets, but both are physical runners. Both can get downhill. So I think for the Packers to stay in the game, I think they'll try to do the same thing the Commanders did in terms of, running the ball, controlling the clock, keeping the Eagles offense off the field. And I think that'll be their game plan, even with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback.
Fair enough. You made a good point. I want to go back on it. It's kind of resonating with me. You said the Packers are a rebuilding team with a $50 million quarterback, and you're right. And that's the situation here now. But at the beginning of the season, we all thought the Packers were going to be contenders, right? And here we are, a loss on Sunday. Their season is essentially over. Just a random question in your gut check. We're not around the team every day. Do you think the Packers will trot out Jordan Love here at some point and give him a little audition down the stretch?
From a relationship standpoint and those things, I think it took them so much time to get things back together. Like we talked about, he's making $50 million. I think you've seen Jordan Love. If that was the way you wanted to go, you probably would have went that way rather than taking all this time to negotiate deals and bring Aaron Rodgers back. So I think from a reputation standpoint, a respect standpoint, no, they'll let him play it out.
That's true. They have come a long ways, right? At one point, Nathaniel Hackett, I still believe, got that Denver Broncos job because they thought they had a shot with Rodgers, right? So you're right. They've traveled a long ways to make amends there. So it's interesting, to say the least. It's interesting that the Eagles, who have been consistently double-digit favorites over recent weeks, last time I checked, Glenn, it's only 6.5 at home. I don't know. I think the Eagles win this one handedly. How do you see it?
I see the same thing. I think in terms of just being efficient on offense, getting back to what you do best. We've seen without Goddard, you can't do the things you do in the middle. So just focus on the running game, target your wide receivers when you can, and then when you can, and play sound defense. That's the recipe. Anything other than that, getting away from it, too much trying to be fancy, too much downfield stuff, you end up with the situation where you had early last week and the week prior where the team is running the ball, keeping your defense on the field for too long. And now we have a game that we shouldn't on Sunday night.
Yeah. And, just every time I count out Aaron Rodgers, he finds a way to stay around and stick around. I don't know. I'm not buying it. It wouldn't surprise me if the Packers are hanging out at the end of the game, but I'm going to give my first prediction of the day. I'm going to go Eagles 31, Packers 17. I just don't think Green Bay is in the same class. Can we get a score prediction from you, Glenn?
I'm in agreement. I think the link will be rocking. You'll have the black helmets debuted for the first time with the all-black jersey, so I think fans will be hyped for that. I don't think the Packers can necessarily trot out, and I don't see Aaron Rodgers being able to pick apart this Eagles secondary with the weapons he has. So short of the run defense just totally falling apart, I'd see it being the blowout going away.
All right, one more for you because I just thought of it too. You mentioned the link, the crowd, everybody's going to be rocking and rolling. I saw a new video clip surface yesterday that I had not previously seen. Sirianni, after that game in Indianapolis, he went to the crowd. He said, "This one's for Frank Reich." And he stood up and he was yelling and he was emotional. And he had some candid words for the media after in the post game. What did you make of that whole scene?
He's an emotional guy. I mean, you have to figure Frank Reich gave him his first real opportunity at running an offense. He let him design an offense. He's the reason he got the job in Philadelphia. You knew the minute they fired him, and they gave that reason for firing. And we talked about, he fell on the sword for the GM and the owner several times with the quarterbacks and all those things. So, Sirianni's a young guy for a head coach. He's an emotional guy. That's what you're going to get. I don't necessarily think he was trying to be a tough guy or obnoxious or anything like that, but I think he was riding for a coach, supporting the coach that you could, depending on how things fall out. You could see that same coach back here. So I think he was just, letting people know how he feels about Frank Reich. I don't see anything wrong with that. Yeah,
and I think people need to understand, like, us Italians, man, we wear our emotions on our sleeves, bro. We're very passionate, I mean, hey, cut us a little slack here. Hey, always a good time chopping it up, talking.
Appreciate you, Rick.
Have a happy Thanksgiving. Will you be hosting? Will you be traveling this weekend? What's on the docket for you?
Quiet weekend at home, hosting, just watching the game. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Tone, the whole staff there. Appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. We appreciate it, man. Have an enjoyable Thanksgiving. And
thank you, guys.
See you back here next week.
Definitely. Appreciate you guys.
All right. There you have it. Glenn Erby, Eagles Newswire, USA Today. Always a fountain of information. We got Oceana home from school. She had to go potty. Midway through that interview, we're going to take a quick commercial break so I can get back on my dad duties. She can't wait to close out the show and say goodbye to you all. But when we come back from the commercial break, we're going to get into the Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon press conferences from yesterday. I also have NFL Pick'em. And then we got the Pro Football Hall of Fame semifinalist. We'll chat about it right after this.